So, the prosecution in the Charlie Kirk murder trial has spent 7 months telling anyone who will listen that their case against Tyler Robinson is untouchable. Trump said it. Pam Bondi said it. Now she's gone. Thank God. Senior administration officials lined up to say it before a single day of trial had happened. They have been so confident for so long at this point, it almost feels a little rehearsed. And then this week, quietly in open court, they offer to proceed without the DNA. Am I missing something? Are you as confused as I am? Because if you are, by the end of this video, you're going to see some __ and you're going to understand exactly what they're afraid of. And I promise you, it's not for the things that they have been telling you for 7 months. If 90% of the evidence against Tyler Robinson was thrown out, this guy would still get the death penalty. If the defense somehow succeeded in throwing 90% of this evidence out, he'd still be found guilty in a court of law. And real quick, I'm Lauren Perrytraw. Well, Perrytraw is the boss. And we run this entire operation network free and independent every single day out of pure principle and an absolute refusal to ever let Katie Miller catch up on us. We're closing in on 100,000 subscribers at the time of this recording, and we're not slowing down. So, we're going to ask you to take a moment to please make sure you're subscribed. Every follow, every sub across all platforms, wherever you listen to your podcast, every comment, 6 words or more, every hype, every 5-star rating, we see it all. And we've been told it creates a very strong protective barrier between you and Stephen Miller. You never know, he could be underneath your sink just sitting there ranting about immigrants. I need you to stay safe. So, subscribe. Let's work towards a timeline where he is in a windowless cage. Okay, so Tyler Robinson is the 23-year-old accused of killing Charlie Kirk at Utah Valley University last September. The prosecution says that they have surveillance footage, for separate confessions, a handwritten note left for his roommate the morning of the text messages, a group chat, a verbal confession to a former cop who physically walked him into the sheriff's office. And they have the DNA. They've tested it independently by both the FBI and the ATF. They've recovered the towel it was wrapped in and a screwdriver that was at the scene. Prosecutors have said in open court that the odds of the DNA belonging to anyone other than Robinson were astronomical. Astronomical. That was their word. So you would think that the DNA is the last thing they would ever volunteer to give up and just move on without, I don't know. And then this week, they offered not to use it. So what's that all about? There's this detail that nobody's talking about. And the defense asked for this delay. They said that they cannot proceed while buried under terabytes of data. We're talking about hundreds of hours of video, thousands of files. Last I saw, it was over 20,000 files. And they said that they cannot move forward without the complete raw data from the federal DNA analysis. And the FBI and the ATF still have not fully handed that over at the time of this recording. The judge agreed, and they pushed the hearing to July. They pushed it to start on my birthday, so we're going to be here with you on then. And hopefully we'll be much further along than 100,000 subs on YouTube. But before that ruling came down to the prosecution, the prosecution in the Charlie Kirk murder case has spent the last 7 months acting like their case against Tyler Robinson is completely bulletproof. From political figures to high-level officials, everyone seemed to repeat the same message before the trial had even started. This case was already decided. The confidence has been non-stop, almost scripted at this point. But then something happened this week that changed the tone completely. Quietly, during open court proceedings, prosecutors said they were willing to move forward without using the DNA evidence. And honestly, that raises a massive question. Why would they suddenly back away from the one piece of evidence they previously described as astronomical proof? Because once you hear the full story, it starts to look like the people running this case may be a lot more nervous than they want the public to believe. And the reason might not be what they've been saying for months. Now, according to prosecutors, the evidence against Tyler Robinson is overwhelming. They claim they have surveillance footage, multiple confessions, handwritten notes, text messages, private group chats, and even statements made to a former police officer who allegedly escorted him into the sheriff's office himself. On top of that, they've repeatedly pointed to DNA evidence tested by both federal agencies and connected to items recovered from the scene. In court, prosecutors even claimed the odds of the DNA belonging to someone else were nearly impossible. That was their own wording. So naturally, you'd expect the DNA evidence to be the centerpiece of the entire trial, especially in a death penalty case. But instead, prosecutors suddenly offered to continue the case without it. That's where things start getting strange. The defense recently asked the judge for more time, arguing that they were drowning in evidence files. We're talking thousands upon thousands of documents, video clips, reports, and raw data files, reportedly over 20,000 pieces of material. According to the defense team, they still have not received the complete underlying DNA analysis from federal investigators, including the raw testing data connected to the FBI and ATF reports. The judge ultimately agreed to delay the hearing until July. But before that ruling happened, prosecutors strongly pushed back against the delay. And during that argument, they made a surprising move. They suggested they were prepared to proceed even if the DNA evidence was removed entirely. Think about that for a second. In a case where prosecutors are seeking the death penalty, you normally protect your strongest forensic evidence at all costs. You do not casually offer to set it aside unless there's a reason you no longer feel comfortable relying on it. Strong scientific evidence is usually something prosecutors fight to highlight, not something they volunteer to move past. So the moment they started saying, "We can continue without the DNA," people immediately began asking the obvious question. What changed? Because if the evidence was truly as airtight as they claimed for months, why suddenly act like it's optional? And that's exactly why this latest courtroom moment has people paying much closer attention to what may be happening behind the scenes. Before the judge even ruled on the delay request, prosecutors made a move that immediately caught people's attention. They fought against delaying the trial, but at the same time, they also suggested they were willing to continue the case without using the DNA evidence at all. Think about how unusual that is. This is a death penalty case. Prosecutors have spent months claiming the DNA evidence was incredibly strong, describing the odds against anyone else being involved as basically impossible. Yet suddenly, when the defense demanded access to the full raw forensic data, prosecutors acted like the science was optional. That's not something you normally see in a capital murder case. Because if forensic evidence is truly airtight, prosecutors usually lean on it heavily. They don't volunteer to put it aside. The only reason you step away from evidence this important is if there's concern about what the defense might uncover once they fully examine the underlying material. And according to the defense, they still haven't received all of it. The complete DNA analysis remains tied up with federal agencies, while the state continues aggressively pushing toward a death penalty verdict. And the DNA evidence isn't the only scientific issue raising questions right now. There's also the ballistic testing. Federal investigators examined fragments recovered during Charlie Kirk's autopsy and attempted to compare them to the rifle investigators say was connected to the case. But the reported conclusion was inconclusive. Investigators could neither confirm nor eliminate the weapon as the source of those fragments. That detail matters more than people realize. The defense argues that the ballistic uncertainty could potentially help Robinson's case and reportedly suggested that one of the federal analysts involved could even become a witness favorable to the defense. Naturally, prosecutors pushed back hard against that interpretation, saying the defense was overstating the meaning of the test results. And technically, both sides are arguing different things. An inconclusive result does not automatically prove the weapon didn't match. Prosecutors say the fragments may simply have been too damaged for a definitive answer. But at the same time, it also means investigators still cannot conclusively tie the fatal shot to the weapon they recovered. Those are two very different implications. Meanwhile, additional testing is reportedly still ongoing, and some of those results have not yet been released publicly. So one of the biggest forensic questions in the case remains unresolved while prosecutors continue pushing for the harshest possible punishment. And then there's another layer that changes how people are looking at this entire situation. Erika Kirk has not stayed on the sidelines. She retained her own attorney and filed motions connected to speeding up the trial process under Utah victims' rights laws. In multiple hearings, prosecutors have openly cited her request for a speedy trial while arguing against delays requested by the defense. So when the prosecution pushes to move the case forward quickly, they're also reinforcing the same legal position being pushed by Erika Kirk's team. Publicly, she has continued saying she wants transparency and has nothing to hide. But critics point out that transparency and pushing aggressively against delays are not necessarily the same thing. Then came one of the most interesting courtroom moments so far. Deputy Utah County Attorney Ryan McBride argued against limiting courtroom cameras and made a statement that immediately grabbed attention. He said, "Mischief lurks in the dark. Let's shine a light on these proceedings." That wording stood out to a lot of people, because according to prosecutors themselves, Robinson already confessed multiple times and voluntarily entered a police station. If the evidence is truly overwhelming, then who exactly is the prosecutor worried about when he starts talking about mischief? That question is why people keep circling back to the unresolved forensic evidence, the raw DNA files that still haven't been fully released, the inconclusive ballistic testing, and the scientific evidence prosecutors once described as their strongest proof before suddenly offering to proceed without it. Now, to be clear, none of this automatically proves Robinson is innocent. Nobody can say that at this stage. But it does explain why more people are starting to ask tougher questions about how this case is being handled behind the scenes. Because when prosecutors quietly move away from the very evidence they once called astronomical, especially in a death penalty case, people are naturally going to wonder why.